Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 22 of Know-It-Alls. This time we're going to do individual, unrelated, sort of maybe they'll get related kinds of things. We're each doing our own thing. We're not even entirely sure what the other ones are doing. I'm Julie Silber, and I'm happy to welcome you here for the Know-It-Alls. We're going to start tonight with Debby Cooney. Debby is an independent quilt scholar and collector who lives in the Washington, D.C. area and specializes in quilts and textiles within a 200-mile radius of there, Maryland, Southern Pennsylvania, and Northern Virginia. And Debbie's going to talk to us about 4-block quilts today. Debby, you're on.
Okay. Well, I like 4-block applique quilts, and I imagine that quilters looking at a large blank square of 30 inches or so of empty muslin needed to devise something to fill it, and that's seems to me to be the biggest thing and most interesting thing to examine about these 4-block quilts. They seem to have appeared around 1840, just out of nowhere, with no precedent that I've ever found. And to me, the interplay of size and design is the very interesting and probably the most interesting point of analysis, even more than the changes over the decades. Some motifs work well in a large space and in a smaller scale as well. Others need modification to look good in a 9 or 16 block set. So here are some of the earliest and most popular applique patterns in 4 blocks and their smaller stepchildren, I guess you'd call them. These are 2 of the very earliest, and they seem to be largely in these days, seem to be from Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Ohio. And so the National Quilt Museum has wonderful examples, so I'm using a lot of theirs. This one on the left, I think, is just wonderfully successful in a design sense because the wreath blocks are large and very full, and yet they're also complex, and they're wonderfully balanced with this up and down swag border with flowers. It's not too heavy, it encloses it really well, and there's just a nice symmetry between all the elements of this quilt. The wreath block does accommodate itself to 9 blocks and 16 and all other sizes in between, really. It can be scaled down a little bit here, and it looks very good. The elements aren't quite as dramatic as on the one on the left, but still very interesting. And the border idea is good. It makes for a lot of eye movement on the periphery. But I think the flowers in the border are too big, and that kind of spoils it a little bit for me. But here we have the rose wreath in the 9-block configuration, and I think it looks just terrific in this too. The one on the left here, I think, is just wonderful. It's balanced in every regard. It has a very complex wreath block, but that's kind of balanced by the same size fine border, which is nice and winding, so that adds a lot of movement. And the little motifs at the corners add quite a bit. Obviously, Pennsylvania here, but over here in North Carolina, there by the 50s, they have obviously picked up the idea. This is a very classic wreath block, surrounded by a green and the yellow and yellowish orange that tends to be favorite in Southern quilts, starting here and going on to the end of the century and even into the 20th century. And you'll notice it has sash, which is unusual for Pennsylvania and mid-Atlantic quilts of this era. even in even Ohio and Indiana. Well, here's another of the favorite 4 blocks of the mid-19th century, the Princess Feather. Here, the one on the left is, has wonderful detail in its in all the feathers. It has a very large kind of center, which I think is quite good because it focuses the eye right in the middle and then sweeps around to the feathers. It's balanced by Sharon Schnitter at the compass points and surrounded by just a nice two-color border. But over here is one other from the Carlson collection, and terrific in using 3 colors, which is unusual for a Princess Feather. A wonderful sweeping motion here on the feathers, and a lovely design border. Just very, while this is open and large, this is smaller and has a lot more movement. And these berries are going to become big in other designs later on. But here it is very early. The 4 block there is you see one very similar to from the same county actually as the one shown on the left in the previous slide. But look what starts to happen when it gets up into the 60s and 70s. The green fades away, and that is really a shame. And you can always tell that that's when things got a little bit older, and then, which is a shame, but what can be done? Sort of a 5 blocker. Actually, this is not done in blocks, and neither is this. It's just a complete sheet on the back, so that they could add this little motif in the center, sort of a straight little block feather, and interestingly split here on the horizontal and in the border as well. So this one even has a center motif too. So that becomes something that turns up quickly, really, after the 4 blocks, as you get this little 5 blocker. But here we have what I think are just terrific examples of a little bit later Princess Feathers. And this one I have a very hard time believing is really 1854. I think that might be later, and just that comes from something else other than the date it was finished. This is so Pennsylvania, it's just not funny. Wonderful definition on these feathers, and the same scale in the border, swirling here, but also closer in, swirling in this border. And this one you could mistake for a Southern quilt if you didn't know it was Pennsylvania. And it adapts well to 9 blocks, but you can't have the definition. There's just not enough room for it. But you can add other things like a different center and little accents in the corners. And then you could put these blue suns with rays in your border, and surround them with fence. So I've never seen one quite like this, but it's a wonderful adaptation of this design. Another one of the big favorites, of course, was the Whig or Democratic rose. It's been thought that perhaps it was, in those days, constructed this way because the Democratic Party symbol was the rooster, and this sort of resembles the comb on the rooster's head. This one is kind of more modern looking than a lot of them because it's just got simple elements coming out of the center part, accented here and there, and has this nice pie cross sashing. Wonderful quilting on this one as well. Its counterpart is much more what you usually see in Whig roses, which is much more lavish use of leaves and flowers coming out of the center. But this one is beautifully balanced here with the size of the flowers all reflecting each other. And interestingly split, pushed into their corners so that you get a nice negative space in here. But overall, both I think very successful examples of 4 blocks. And of course, quilt makers in this day and age couldn't have anticipated the fact that these would someday hang on walls where 4 blocks are visually just wonderful for modern viewers. It wouldn't have occurred to them at all that such a thing could happen, but it's something that is wonderful for people who are living now and can see them this way. Wig Bros does adapt well to 9 blocks. This one kind of has straight X's, makes X's here, which is something we'll see in other types of 4 blockers. And it kind of sets up a swirl for it with the way the flowers are positioned, enclosed in a very nice swag border. So that gives the eye something to whirl around it. But I love this example from Indiana. It just couldn't be any better. The blocks are smaller and yet more complex almost than these and closer in. But the border in this one is just fabulous. We've got these pots here. We have feeding birds on the with grapes and berries. Beautiful quilting. Just a terrific example of a wig rose, and from the Midwest as the designs are spreading westward with the population. Okay, here we have even more adaptation of the wig rose. This one is 5 blocks, something like the earlier ones we saw, but with half blocks on these edges. Very so dogtooth border, and then a lovely sort of larger scale flowers in the border that replicate chintz, which was a very popular edge treatment for Maryland quilts up into 1850s and 60s. So a lot more complex wig rose than the others. But here we also have a southern example with sash. The scale is still very good. It has good standout quilting there and uses that palette that is much more common in Southern quilts than Mid-Atlantic and Midwestern at that point. Pennsylvania, after the Civil War, really adapted color backgrounds, blues, oranges, yellows. And here are 2 from getting up into the 60s and up to the 80s. This one on the blue background is kind of stark in that it leaves quite a bit of the area to be shown. It's not covering it all, which a lot of Pennsylvania quilts do, just leaving a few elements in the corners, no real border treatment like a lot of them have. 1 block simplified in the center. So it's I think stripped down but successful version of the wig rose. And this is one of the last ones you see from that era. Simpler, little bit of sawtooth going on here, but border is very much simpler too. Just a zigzag. But of course, here the best thing I think is the interplay of these colors of the pink and the teal and on the yellow background. Really makes a good combination. Oh, and the pot of flowers. Well, this is a really interesting 4-block combination. This one is about as crowded as you could possibly get. Every inch of space is taken up with this way over the top pot with its drooping flowers and branching out on here with berries, and here this border with eagles and pots together. Just wonderful, and probably one of the earliest of this genre. Over here, the Ohio version, I think, is much more successful because it's not as crowded. It's beautifully balanced here, and it has open space. And yeah, the balance with the border is much better than this one. It seems to almost cup the interior space, but with a leaf that connects, and little blossoms here. But both of them just very graphic. Here we have a little simpler versions. This one has more white space, and that is welcome. And these are kind of interesting ways to do a border, not an edge treatment that we usually see. 3 different elements there. Midwestern, probably, or Pennsylvania. This Indiana version, I think, though, is probably much more successful because it's got a more graceful combination here. This 2-color flower is just terrific, and it's repeated in this border that swirls gently around the 2 pots, the 4 pots in the center. Just a wonderful version of this one. And here is sort of stripped down variation of it. I think it's a little too stripped down for me. It doesn't balance as well with the more prominent border elements, but it does leave more space for quilting, which this one has in very nicely done. And the actual pot of flowers that showed up in 1849 is still being circulated up close to 1900 in Italy and in Maryland even. This one's very close to the earlier one. Little heavier color and not as refined looking, but still there it is, maybe 30, 40 years after the design seems to have first appeared. Oh, and this, I think, is just a wonderful two wonderful examples that Linda Carlson found, creating cross flowers, creating an X pattern, both here and all over, balanced perfectly by this vine border that adds an extra level of interest out here, even though it's contained by this sawtooth in here. But well, here's a South Carolina version of cross flowers, and I think this one is very successful, even though it has not got these. It has these extras, and they sit in the corners here and make an extra pattern through here and yet complete the border. So I think this one is very unusual and balances really well these smaller appliques with these larger X's. Cross flowers and extra leaves and flowers and bordered with little smaller elements. Definitely your eye is drawn to the what's going on with the 4-block in the center. This one from Kentucky, very early in the 9-block iteration of these. I think this would have been very successful as a 4-block, but 9-block works very well. Doesn't have to be doesn't have to be as complicated as this one, which one could say is just a little too heavy. This one is much lighter and spreads out the elements so well, and is finished with a simple border, simple vine border. Adds a little bit of movement here, but a very nice combination of the more solid blocks and the lighter elements here. Oh, and the coxcomb is a favorite in Pennsylvania, and spreading westward from there. This one you couldn't mistake really for any place else. These elements of the coxcomb out here are somewhat heavy until you sort of start comparing it with the center part, which is substantial enough in itself. And very simple, just one little sawtooth border, nothing fancy in the outer border. So you've just got this bold statement of color, which is just, I think, very attractive. But so is this one, much more complex. You've got a sort of a diamond shape in the 4-block already. So you've got that going on. You have side up and down and side to side movement, and then meeting here and here in the corners, and surrounded by a simpler, thank goodness, fine border in just the one color with a little accent. And Missouri, we're already starting to pick up Western states. I mean, this one could have been made in Pennsylvania and emigrated with settlers to Missouri, but it also could have been made there by 1860. Coxcomb and Currents, both of these 5-block assemblies, they do not have the split down the center. They were made on a single sheet. This one starting to show fade as this one as we get into the 70s or 80s. The green is not the 2-step green we were seeing before, but the 4-block is starting to yield much more often to some sort of element in the middle. And both of these show not only the 4-block, but here we've got partial blocks and no border except white, which very attractive the way it's done. There's enough going on in the middle, but here with the old one from Laura Fischler's collection is more of a 9-block, although it has a 5-block look for here, but with these extras in the points, it more resembles a 9-block. And the Midwestern style border with a container looks terrific with it. So the complexity of this one is a different order from that one. And this one shows off its quilting very well. So it's important to leave that white space. Coxcomb and Currents here. We've got a southern version with sashing and with two colors, but on white with wonderful show of this color with its corner blocks as well. North Carolina, 1870, which seems about right. And sort of at the end of the period of these 4 blocks, you see this one on this pink background, which just really sets off everything in it. And it's very complex, almost a little bit too much here, but you really appreciate it because it's just so lavishly done. Very simple border here, which helps. One of the designs that you won't see that much is this pine tree, rose and pine tree. It's very wonderfully done here, I think, with a pine tree leaves, a little bit of sash, not so common in Pennsylvania examples, but a smaller scale from the center in the outer border, and with the sash, even smaller version of the outer border. This scales down somewhat well to a 9 or a 12 block. It kind of looks a bit different. And in this case, it almost seems like they are maybe just berries here instead of part of a pine tree. I think the 4 blocks in this pattern are much more effective. But I've seen several of these in the scaled down version. And while it's very different, I think it's comparable. And this example is beautifully done with the same sort of berries in triangle form out in the border. And flower baskets, pots and baskets abound in 4-block configurations. And this 1845 is a very early version. I think this one is probably much faded, and in its original colors would have been much more bold and effective, but we'll take what we can get here. Simpler elements in the upper parts of the bouquets work very well, I think, together with a little bit more heft down here with the berries, and the surrounding border is beautifully proportioned to fit around these two levels. This one is very, very bold and attractive. It's clunkier in the stem area than, much more so than this, but it's made up for by the interest in the different flowers and the berries in the border, and wonderfully bordered by this zigzag motion on the vine here, what with the berries buried into it. And I love this basket woven. It's actually woven with fabric in here. You don't see this one quite as much as some of the others because it's just, I think, probably so over the top, done probably in either Pennsylvania or the Midwest. And I could go on, but that's all the time I have.
Yeah. Lots and lots of images, lots of good conversation about it. I don't know how much time we're going to have for discussion. I think we'll unless somebody, Lynne, you have something you want to say?
Well, I can't help but ask Debbie's opinion on the infamous pot of flowers quilt that made it into my Northern Comfort exhibition at Old Sturbridge Village, New England's quilts. It came with a history of having been made in Braintree, Massachusetts, and that quilt is so, I don't know, I won't say common, but there's a lot of them around. I'm just wondering.
It could have started there. These quilts tend not to be found as much in New England, but some of them certainly could have started there.
Lynne, why don't you post a picture of it on our website or our Facebook page so we can take a look at it?
I mean, Pennsylvania was not the cradle of everything, but it seems that they made so many quilts that maybe they found it and someone found it in New England and spread quickly in Pennsylvania.
Or, there's just so much correspondence at the time. I'm not saying that it's typical of New England by any stretch, but of course the merchandising department picked up on that one quilt as a signature piece for the mugs and the keychains and everything.
But you wonder why some of these other patterns, which became popular in Pennsylvania and Ohio, didn't go backward to New England. I mean, it seems to have come this way, but it didn't go the other way.
Right. That's what I'm wondering about.
Yeah. Well, we're very lucky that at this point, Barbara's Southern History Facebook page is posting 4-block Southern quilts, and there's wonderful colors, and they do seem to have much more sashing and much more constructed sashing than any of these Pennsylvania or Ohio examples.
It definitely is interesting how I didn't even notice that until we started posting them. But if it's got a real strong visual sash, often just piece strips, it's probably Southern. Now other people put sashing, but often that sashing might be white, so it just is a space rather than a visual.
Let's remind our viewers that there is such a page on Facebook, that it's called Quilt History South. Is that what it's called?
And in the bibliography we'll put a link.
Yeah, so you'll be able to
because it's sort of a group think where as I say, I never noticed that, and then people started posting. So we established some things that we didn't understand before. It's really pretty great.
Oh, wonderful. It's just a wonderful way to do it. Okay, let's move on to Barbara.
It's me.
Barbara is an independent scholar and author whose focus is quilts and women's history. And in addition to her many books and articles and exhibitions, Barbara has a popular blog called Material and Culture. And as we mentioned, this wonderful page that she's created on Facebook called Quilt History South. So Barbara.
All right. Well, it was fun to listen to Debbie talk about the aesthetics of the quilts. You know, that's how I first got into this, was interested in the compositions, because I made quilts and I wanted mine to look as good as that. I suspect Debbie might have some art background, art teacher background there. Yeah, because I was an art teacher too, but that was great. So you appreciate quilts for many reasons. And I'm going to go into my later interest, which is more in the women's lives, the lives of the women who made them, because as it's become a cliche, they didn't leave much, but they did leave us their quilts and a little bit of biography that we can track down. So I'm going to talk about my experiences with this particular quilt. I've known about it for years. It's in the Shelburne. We know nothing about how it got there, nothing about the maker. And you can say, well, there's names on it, but those are not the names of the makers. Those are the names of the plants. So this one is a woodbine. And I'm going to go to, let's see. Excuse me while I guess I can't. Okay, so I've always been fascinated by it because I love to know what people call quilts and quilt patterns. And all these are sort of botanical names rather than fanciful names too. Well, one day I was minding my own business and I saw the same quilt for sale. And I was shocked because I didn't think the Shelburne ever sold their quilts. But then I looked at it. I'm trying to move myself around here. I looked at it and I realized it is not the same quilt because it has no inking on the blocks. It is almost the same quilt. If you overlap them, you will see that the same blocks appear very close in size. And one of the biggest differences, the only way I can keep them apart, is down here, the grapes and one go to the left and the grapes and the other go to the right. So this is mind-boggling. How can two quilts look so much alike? And I've spent about 1.5 years on this. And as you can see, it hasn't been a pleasant journey. But then I found a third, and I could go on. I have 8 in all. The one over here, which see, I'm in the wrong place here. The one on the right, Carolyn Miller pointed out, it's made in Union County, Pennsylvania, and it is featured in a book. And so it actually has names of humans on it rather than the names of the plants. Now, it's not quite the same as the others, as the other two, but the blocks are the same, and that's what gets very interesting. So as I say, now I have 8 quilts. Now, what makes these a group is that the blocks repeat. They are odd blocks, some of them. There are a lot of wreaths and things that are common, but there's some very odd blocks, like this twisty sort of morning glory that they call woodbine in that Shelburne quilt. A woodbine is a name for a weed, sort of related to the morning glory. I'll go over these real quickly. This one's from the Montana project. I think it's in a museum in Montana. This one's from the New York project. This one, I have no idea where it came from. You know, there are things floating around on the internet. This one is Carolyn Miller. She bought it, and that's why she knows quite a bit about them. And it's got the same kind of blocks, not all the same, but several blocks that repeat. And here's the Shelburnes, and then this one from the auction, and this one from Union County, Pennsylvania. And this one belongs to Donna Stakovich. And it's very interesting in that the overall look with the blocks on point is not the same, but the blocks are the same. And that is what I'm collecting, is pictures of the blocks. They differ from what Debbie was just showing us with that very German folk arts aesthetic, although they are red and green, which is important color, but they don't many of the blocks, the ones I'm really looking at that are unusual rather than the wreaths, are not symmetrical in the four-way symmetry that you often see with applique blocks. And they're not so much abstractions of flowers, but you could recognize it. Once you start looking, you can say, well, that's a grape. That's very obviously a grape. And there's the woodbine again, but very, very stylized. One of my favorites down here is, this is a Shelburne's. It's called True Lover's Knot on the quilt itself. And so I've looked up all these flowers, you know, and tried to figure it out. But here's True Lover's Knot again. And it's not that outrageously unique, but it's not something you see over and over, like things like the hex combs that Debbie was showing us. So how are these quilts linked? And this where to begin. I decided I have two quilts that have names, family names on them. And so I could do some genealogy. And I thought I'd talk about this because this is something people often ask. Where do you guys get the idea, you know, where do you guys get the information that helps you track down the makers? And so I thought I'd give you a little overview of what I'd been doing, to no avail here. But I'm looking for names on the quilts. I've got two. I'm looking for places on the quilts. And I really, no one has written the name of a place, but that one from Union County, Pennsylvania. And then you also have to make up some hypotheses. You have to decide, you know, how are these related? Why are they unique? Why is this group of 8 unusual? So this is what we're going to go through. Now, I started with the names on the quilts, and it has just been difficult. The one in Union County, Pennsylvania, was supposedly made in memory of this woman's daughter. Her name was Elizabeth Carolyn Straub, S-T-R-A-U-B, and we're all very familiar with all the Pennsylvania German people who settled in Pennsylvania and continued to speak German. And I don't speak German, so that's been a problem here trying to track them down. But here you see some genealogy on Elizabeth Carolyn, although she's called Carolyn Elizabeth here. She married William Goodrich. We know that. The picture that I have, which isn't that great, is from Anita Schorse's Plain and Fancy, which is the country quilts of the Pennsylvania Germans. And that is definitely one of the major design ideas in American applique, is that Pennsylvania German aesthetic. So all I've got is a black and white picture right now. And there are many names on there. And they're mostly from Milton, Pennsylvania. So I have been looking, and I'll tell you how I do it. I use 3 major sites. Now, in the discussion, you guys might have other, like if Alden were here, she could say, well, I have a job at the DAR, and the DAR is one of the best genealogical sites in the United States, but I don't have that. I like, see if I can get this. Web's way down a minute. Nope. I like up here, family search. It's out of my my view here, but you might be able to see it. It's from the Latter-day Saints. It's free. I find it very comprehensive, and I find it very easy to use because I use it every day. So that is my go-to genealogy. There are others, Ancestry.com, which I can get through my library. They charge, but most libraries offer that. I also use Find a Grave a lot. It is remarkably useful, and it's free. People who mostly are related to the deceased will post things, but they're also volunteers who go around to cemeteries and record everything. And then the great thing is they provide links. So if you can find a woman and find a grave in Pennsylvania, you might be able to find her mother who came from New York, and link, and it will show you the mother's grave too. And it's free. Then the last is newspapers.com, which Merikay and I love, and it's expensive. It's one of my hobbies. I figure I can afford it, but you might be able to get it through libraries. And newspapers.com, it's not every newspaper ever published in the United States, or in the world, I guess even, but but it is extremely comprehensive. And I look through that every day just for fun more than anything. I'd much rather be in 1856 than 2023. Thanks. So you have to learn, though, if you're going to be dealing with these genealogical things, and these are my top three, is how they thought. So, you know, you're not going to find this Mrs. Goodrich, Elizabeth Carolyn, listed as Elizabeth Carolyn Goodrich very often in any of these, because she tends, find a grave's good, but she tends to be the reflection of her husband. And so she would be Mrs. Reverend W. Goodrich. William was a minister who traveled around a lot in Pennsylvania. Well, once you start looking at these, though, this is one of the worst examples, these Straubs, is that they're very confused about the names. Mrs. Elizabeth Carolyn Goodrich died. Too bad. She was the daughter of Mr. Abraham Straub, so we know her maiden name was Straub, and she was from Milton. She was a Miltonian, and she was married to Reverend E.C. Goodrich. Well, wait a minute, that's not his name. His name is William. She's Mrs. E.C. Goodrich. Nobody's proofreading these things, so you have to always do a lot of double checking. Well, it hasn't been pretty, as I said. There I am. There are 3 people on this Union County quilt named Strine. There's a Strine cemetery, the Harmony, 64 Strines in there. And of course, they repeat the names over and over again. So I've just had to give up. I keep thinking I'm going to do this, you know, this presentation this weekend. Surely I have some files where I've solved any of these genealogical problems. I couldn't find any. I've been working on it for a year and a half, and when I go back through my files, it's just like, oh, I don't know. Greta Garbo's there saying, in the bar, she's saying, pour me a drink and don't be stingy about it in that movie. I've just given up on Strines. And the major problem is I'm not a German speaker. And that really does mean that I don't have access to their newspapers in German language. Well, I've got another quilt with names on it. But look at the date on this one. Florence Thompson married George Stutz in 1936. It's the same blocks. Here's the True Lover's Knot, the grape. But 1936, I don't think this was Florence's quilt, although her name is on it. It might be George's mother's, but then it's just lost. I can't track her backwards. But it's a great set of patterns. And I love how in Florence's things have really gotten minimal. We should have Debbie giving us her aesthetic judgments, but that is not skillful nor graceful. Let me go down. So then I have my hypothesis, and I'm always trying to form the concept of how would 8 women make similar quilts, and you have to have a hypothesis. I might say it was they were all sisters. There were 8 sisters. And that's the kind of hypothesis you occasionally see. I may say it was a mother who had 8 children, and you often see that. But I think it was more a school project. That's just my hypothesis, my guess. So here we have a hop vine, which hops are very common American crop. And it's the way it's laid out asymmetrically and sort of naturalistic, and with the name down there on the shellbirds. I wonder if this isn't an herbarium, which is, I learned quite a bit about over the last year and a half. Girls who took science were encouraged to make herbariums, scrapbooks. They could buy the scrapbook or make their own. And it's pretty fascinating. It's really the first stir of science for girls' education in the 1830s, 40s, 50s. So I wonder, there's paper herbariums, there are herbariums. I wonder if this is not a fabric herbarium. Well, I've given up on trying to find the teacher who would have taught this. Over here, you can see we have a botaniste, this kind of gruesome illustration there. It was so popular for girls. And I was looking, and hope to find someday, a teacher in a school, maybe near Pennsylvania, near Milton, Pennsylvania, who taught both sewing, needlework, and botany. And botany, as I say, was a very popular skill area or curriculum area for girls. And I'm sure there are many women who do this. They taught the needlework because the girls' mothers wanted it, and they taught the science because the girls wanted it themselves. And herbaria, and botanizing became a huge pastime in the mid-19th century. So instead of going on with the genealogical research, I decided back to aesthetics. I really liked the way these looked. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to make them. I'm just going to sew them, and maybe something will reveal itself. So next year, I'm going to do a block of the month on my Civil War quilts blog. And my model makers, Danielle here and Becky Brown, and that's mine, are going to make a red and green quilt using the same patterns. Now, both of us, Becky hasn't started, but she's got her fabric purchased. We're using red and green with both Becky or Danielle and I are going Australian in our aesthetic there with the black and white and the red and green. But we picked the easiest blocks to start with. And Danielle's isn't sewn down yet, but nicely basted. And she usually does machine applique. So she's going to machine or hand applique it. And I usually do hand. So that's all I can say. I mean, I should email each of you and ask you if you can think of any other way I can find out more about the Straubs and all the people from Milton, Pennsylvania, and then the Strutzes from New York. Very mysterious. So I'm going to stop here. I don't think there's another one. Nope. And so what do you guys think?
How about you find a German speaker, someone who can help you with the German?
I know I could find a German speaker.
I mean, that might get you somewhere, right?
Oh, it will get me somewhere. I can hire a German genealogist. All right, I'm writing this.
Well, talk to Candace at the Schwenkfelder.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, the Schwenkfelder.
That's
Yes,
an
it has
Schwenkfelder is a
volunteers,
German.
I think.
Well, Debbie, what is a Schwenkfelder?
It's a
Religious.
it's a
group.
sect, right? A religious
Yeah.
sect.
Yes.
And, there's a museum there, or a historical, what would you call it?
It's the Schwenkfelder Heritage Center and Museum, or Heritage
Yeah,
Center.
I'll put it in the
in Pennsburg, Pennsylvania.
Right. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
That's an excellent suggestion.
Mhm.
Well, I love the fact that you're starting something new. You know, in 150 years, somebody's going to say, how?
It's so obvious. The last name Straub is spelled Strout, Straub, Strub, and that's the problem in translation. You know, we tend to be very strict about spelling, and when I first started looking at this, and you probably did too, looking at things like this, you go, she can't even spell her own name, which they didn't. They didn't care.
Right.
German names in the US are hard to trace because a lot of times when they were anglicized, they spelled them differently, and they even spell them differently. Their names are spelled differently in the census because the census taker just decided he wasn't going to use all those letters in their writing, and they change it very often. I have some Pennsylvania names on quilts that I can't trace at all because they're just clearly they were living there, but they just are not recorded where we can find them because of the name change, the spelling changes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I saw a German genealogist. You know, my own family, Brackman, I think my father's the only person who spelled it that way. My grandma spelled it different. My uncles and cousins spelled it all different. It was all from a, you know.
Well,
So,
I love your idea of the herbarium.
That's,
because that was such a pastime for women, and being natural themselves in their
Mhm.
behavior was tied to nature and gardening and all this sort of thing. And so I think that is your source, your inspiration for those quilts.
Mhm.
But
yes.
it is so odd that there's so many, but they're so different.
And yet they're so the same.
Right.
It's so weird.
And I think I shared with you all another time about a quilt that I have that has flowers and trees on it, in which the woman embroidered what it was. They're not the same designs.
one.
The sunflower and crab apple, and I sold that quilt, but I think it dated to about 1880. I'll post
Well, I'm
that.
thinking this quilt, these quilts might be 50s. Maybe I'm
Mhm.
looking mid 50s. Yeah, what was
Well,
I?
it'd be interesting to kind of think about those in context with other sort of herbarium
Right.
quilts.
And when I do the block of the month, I've got 12 months to talk about. So what I did was I looked up 12 famous botanists, found many very interesting links to women, and many women wrote manuals, botany manuals, and also looking for teachers who taught both needlework and botany. So it'll all link to that kind of herbarium idea. It was just, you're kind of an expert on the social life at that time, and it was part of women's identity was to be, it's people talk about the language of flowers, and how a violet might mean something. They were more interested, because they were being trained, to categorize them.
Mhm.
And that's Julie and I, we've all laughed at the sunflower quilt that Julie has. It has this obvious sunflower on it, and then it says sunflower below it. But it's not that she wants you to know what it is. It's that her teacher said you must identify each thing. And so it was exercises in categorizing, which is the basis of science.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
quilting.
Fascinating stuff, really interesting. Great to be in the middle of it with you, Barbara.
Oh, you
Yes.
sort of are. I keep giving up. But we're gonna work. If you want to applicate something, I'll send you the pattern.
And one of the wonderful things about this for me is that every once in a while we do something like this, and one of our viewers has something like it or
Mhm.
has a piece of information, and we encourage you all to get in touch with us through the Facebook page.
Yes.
Okay, let's go on. Let's move on.
All right. We're going to go and move on to our friend Merikay. Merikay Waldvogel is another independent scholar, quilt historian and author. She lives in Knoxville, Tennessee, and her quilt research spans a broad swath of quilt history, from 19th century Southern quilts and patterns through 20th century quilts and quilt makers. So, Merikay.
Okay. Well, I'm going to share, do a little show and tell of a trip I took coming back from the Midwest at Thanksgiving. I stopped at the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky. And I was really impressed with the quality of the exhibits that were there. Usually it's only modern quilts on display, and there were some really especially some really strong kind of civil rights exhibits. And I just was really impressed. But anyway, I was there to see this exhibit of antique quilts. And it was put together by Harold Mailand. I don't know Harold, but I think some of the know-it-alls do. He is a textile conservator. He was the first textile conservator at the Indianapolis Museum of Art. He wrote a book that I have used and keep a copy of, called Preserving Textiles, a Guide for the Non-Specialists. In 1986, he founded his company, Textile Conservation Services, specializing in textile conservation of European tapestries, rugs, things like that. He knew about quilts. Of course, he consulted on quilts, but for this particular exhibit, he tells us that he didn't really have a collection. He appreciated quilts, but a few years ago, he was the executor of 2 family estates that had a number of quilts in them. And he suddenly became very interested in taking care of those particular quilts. So this exhibit has is a mix of some of those quilts from his family from Indiana, basically. His grandfather had been a tailor, and he's got some really good quilt makers in his family. But he also has some really exquisite old pieces. And I just thought that the know-it-alls would like to see them. And here we are looking at the pieces in the upper left are from his family. But these in the bottom right are some of the older pieces in his collection. I am heading the end of this month on a trip to India, and it is a textile tour. And we're going to learn about block printing and quilt making in India. So I was thrilled to see this Palampur, even though I'm going to the western side of India, and this one is from southeast India. It is a smaller piece, and he felt like it was made for an Islamic home, and it's a wall piece that would hang on the wall. And then next to it is a small whole cloth quilt that is made of a fabric that I think we've seen before. I've seen it at the Winterthur collection, and it's made of fabric possibly made in England for the American market. Again, circa 1830 to 1840. That quilt that you just saw in the back is a really interesting one because it does have a name and a date in the center. Mary Stiles, and some of these he acquired at auctions through antique dealers. He did check some of the information, but I'm not sure if this information came directly from the dealer, but he did find a Mary Stiles in England, birth and death dates that would fit for the making of this quilt in about 1804. I do question the inking of the name Mary Stiles on it. It is, but it's just a wonderful piece to look at. And I think what's fun to go to an exhibit like this is these are pieces that haven't been out on the market, and they're new and they're fun to be able to get up close. You never know what you're going to see or what you're going to connect with. This is the earliest piece in the exhibition. It's indigo, an indigo resist, made in India, again, circa 1780. So this is the side of India that I'm going to go to, the western side of India. And again, thrilled to get up close to it. I was quite surprised at how thin the fabric was. I know how indigo resists are made, but I don't think I've ever been that close to one. This one did come through Connecticut and was probably traded into the colonies in the early years of this country. I was thinking of Lynne. When I saw this one, I was thinking of Tennessee stuffed and corded quilts. Here's one from New York, which is signed and dated 1835. Her name is there, Louisa Stearns, and Harold did do the genealogy on this. He has not found her birth name, but there is a Louisa Stearns who was born 1788 in Richland, Oswego, New York, who married Isaac Stearns in 1814, who lived nearby. She died in 1847 in Pulaski, Oswego, New York. This is an incredible, it's large, and I was really surprised to see the scalloped border. There's an eagle in here, and the cartouche is right underneath a weeping willow tree at the top. It's beautifully corded and stuffed and quilted. And I, you know, in the South, well, especially in East Tennessee, when we did our state survey, there are a number of stuffed quilts that show up just south of Knoxville in a county. Ray County is the name of it. And I always say, well, you know, the quilts up in the Northeast, the white work, stuffed and corded ones kind of ended in the 1830s and 40s. And for some reason, they continued, or maybe they were reintroduced in the South, and they are some of the really interesting quilts that we found in our state survey. Of course, they also show up in Kentucky. Now, this is one that I think Lynne might talk about in her presentation. It's, I think Harold purchased it at Sotheby's in an auction in 2005 there were auction items from a royal house in Hanover, Germany. It's an unusual sized quilt, I thought, 53 inches by 82 inches. And he thought that it, again, would be hung on the wall next to a bed. And it's attributed to Marie, Princess of Saxe at Altenburg. Her birth and death dates are there, 1818 to 1907. Her husband was a cousin of Queen Victoria. He was in the royal family in Germany, and they left to go to Austria and left the royal house filled with some incredible items. This is one, and Harold owns it. He starts out by saying, "What's grandmother's flower garden doing in the 19th century?" And we've talked about this. I think the very first know-it-all, we talked about the fact that this design is much older than grandmother's flower garden. And we'll hear a little bit more from Lynne. Another one that's in the book that I was thinking of Lynne when I saw this. He purchased it in an auction, and the auction book said that it was Amish/Mennonite, and it was wool. It was Amish Mennonite crazy quilt. And it is dated there in the center, and I've blown it up, and it says TAP. I think he came up with the name Tilly A. Paulus with her birth and death dates of 1860 to 1929, but it's dated 1892. He references Patricia Herr's book, Quilting Traditions, published by Schiffer in 2000, where she talks about the regional characteristics of Lancaster and Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and mentions the fact that the initials are in the center of the quilt. Not exactly in the center of the quilt here, but he quickly transferred it, and he talks about it in the catalog that goes with this exhibit. This is another one. I think we've talked about this together. It is an album quilt. He said it was from Western Maryland. There's an inked signature, Willie Boone, and it's up there in the upper right, next to the church with the steeple in the upper right. Looking at some of the 4-block ones and some of the ones that Barbara has just shown, it's interesting to compare these red and green examples to those. Well, this is where I got a little excited. Really, Jerry, my husband, was ahead of me, and he came back and he said, "Oh, Merikay, wait till you see this red work quilt." And I said, oh, okay. So I got over there, and in the center, it's a typical red. It's beautiful. It's large, and really large motifs. But in the center is this block that says, "Wait for me." And here's another one next to it. Very intricate, well done embroidery. This says, "Coming home from school." These are not Sunbonnet Sue or Kate Greenway figures. I wish I knew more about the source of these particular illustrations. I mean, the source of the transfer, I'm sure it was a transfer pattern, But nevertheless, I don't know if you remember, but the people who've been watching the Know-It-All since the very beginning, way back in episode 2, which is free on YouTube. And if you haven't seen it, it'd be kind of fun to go back there and see it. March of 2021. Anyway, this quilt on the left is one I talked about, the Not So Crazy quilt by Lily Harvey. It's owned by the East Tennessee Historical Society. I've studied this for years and years. At first, we didn't know the date of it. And one of the things I thought was to look at the images. And here in the center is this little girl. And at the bottom of the image, it says, "Wait for me," just like the one we just saw on that redwork quilt. And I think I'm not sure I knew this at the time, episode 2, but we did link it back to an actual oil painting by a woman named Sophie Jembra Anderson. She was French. She married an artist, Walter Anderson. They lived in England, but they eventually moved to the United States in the 19th century. She, according to this bit of a bio, she worked in the chromolith industry. She may have actually made this. I realize this today. I'm putting this together. This print on the right you could see it's kind of a card. It says at the bottom, "Wait for me." And people could buy it and frame it. And in fact, this one is framed and it hung on the wall in a home here in Knoxville. Not at all connected to the quilt, but there it is. And notice how close the two images are, from the original oil painting to the print. And again, it's interesting again to do these segments because we go back and we find out more stuff. And currently, if you Google this woman's name, Sophie Anderson, they'll give you a whole grouping of paintings that she did. And they talk about this one that is called "Wait for Me," or "Returning Home from School." And see, I didn't really relate to that. But indeed, there is a little tablet there at her foot and her little toe sack that she may have had taken her lunch in. So, but they don't know the date it was made or the whereabouts of the oil painting. So this is what I have so far: the original painting, a frame print, and what we call dressed embroidery on that Lily Harvey quilt, the Not So Crazy quilt. And then all these redwork examples on the bottom. The one on the left is a cover for a mattress about the size of a baby crib. And the one in the center is it's one block among maybe 80 blocks that are framed in red on an album quilt. And the one on the right is the one in Harold Mailand's quilt. So that was fun. And I'm going to stop pretty quick, but there's so many things that were interesting in this. This guy must be kind of a funny guy because, well, look at this crazy quilt on the right. This is one he just, he got it because he liked it. And the one on the right is actually, maybe from his family. Looking at it, it might look like a nice embroidered quilt. And I thought, is that a kit quilt? But I got up close, and the one on the right here, the close-up, you could see it's painted. It's all painted. And Harold goes into a little history about when the company Chemex introduced this fabric painting, and therefore dates the quilt to about 1960. Look at the quilting on this, and the white, the background, and they painted it. And really, it's quite nice. I don't think I've ever seen another one like it. And then, of course, the one on the left is just a hoot. It is so thick and heavy with that plush embroidery. It's just a lot of fun. But this is my favorite quilt in the whole show. And it's a two-sided quilt. And it's made of corduroy. The red and blue on the left is corduroy pieces. And the black and white are pieces again of flannel. And he talks about the fact that in Indiana, in the 50s, Zennia Cord has told the same story. They used to have these cords, they called them, these pants in high school. And it was kind of like a letter sweater. I don't have the whole story, but he seems to think that this is not a family piece, but he saw it in LaGrange, Indiana, and bought it. And it brought back memories of high school. And in fact, in the catalog, he relates it to the fact that the G's Bend quilters in the 60s and 70s did have a contract to make pillows and things like that from corduroy, and they used it in their quilts. And it does look very coincidentally, again, very fun and abstract. So the exhibit runs through January 17th, which is not far away. But I sure hope that this exhibit stays together. I see it as a nice group of, it's about 35, 40 pieces. I hope another museum will take it. I hope people will be able to get to see it. There is a very nice little catalog. It costs just $10. And it is available at the National Quilt Museum in Paducah. It's a really nice piece. So I hope you enjoyed that quick little tour through an interesting exhibit with some one-of-a-kind quilts. And I want to thank Harold. I've never met him, but I really like his aesthetic. I like what he collects. And the National Quilt Museum for letting me share this with you. Okay, that's it.
Wonderful.
Thank you for taking us with you. What a treat. Wonderful.
So now how do I unshare right there? Maybe?
I made one connection that may or may not hold up under scrutiny, but that crazy quilt that was Amish / Mennonite maybe looks to me very much like Arthur, Illinois Amish quilts. There are Amish quilts made in Arthur. There was one quilt maker in particular who was quite a pretty much a genius in my estimation, who made crazy quilts. And it so much has that look. I wonder if there's some connection somewhere. It'd be really worth checking out. I will post some photos of the Arthur, Illinois crazy quilts, and we'll see if anybody else makes a connection there.
Good.
Okay.
I'm wondering if anybody else is a little doubtful of the attribution to India of that indigo resist.
Well,
Linda Eaton in her rewrite of printed textiles found pretty definitively that those were coming out of England.
Well, we'll find out. I am actually going to a town. It's in Kutch, India. That's all indigo that we are going to. I've read a little bit about it. I know, I know a lot about the whole process of making indigo. We'll see.
Well, we'll wait for the report.
Wait for the report. But there is there's a printed name on the back of that quilt. And it's Atherton is the name. And it's, let's see. And on the back of the quilt is inscribed, "O Atherton," Atwater. It is likely the owner was Orilla Bristol, born 1791 in Cheshire, New Haven, Connecticut. She married a man named Flamen Atwater on January 10th, 1810. She died 1852 in Cheshire, Connecticut.
I want to talk about the Mary Stiles quilt.
Yeah.
That quilt has been in the literature for quite a while.
Oh.
It was discovered in the Goshenhofen survey. And it was at the time when they were, Pennsylvania has so many quilts, they write books by county and religion. And so it was considered the earliest Pennsylvania quilt in that area, 1804. And it was pronounced, it was written as Mary Stites. Now I know this because I copied it. Copying a quilt, as we learned at AQSD, really does, it's a way of studying a quilt. And so I know it very well. I am shocked to see that that's the name, though, in inking. They didn't say that in the book.
Yes.
It doesn't ring true. And also, Stites, I think we found Mary Stites in Pennsylvania. That doesn't look like an English quilt to me. But
isn't the date in cross stitch? Am I
yes.
right with that? Yeah.
And
Yes.
it's like the name has been added later with the laundry marker or something.
No, it's ink. It doesn't look like black ink like you would expect from the 1830s.
Mm. So I think that's what I'll do is we're going to make the bibliography for you guys, and we will put the link, to the book by Nancy Rowan,
Right.
and show you that quilt. But I would guess it was more American than English. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think we all have visual.
I don't know where he got the info about her birth and death dates.
Yeah. Well, definitely looking at that name, you could read it as Styles or Stites. It's German. Stites is not a common name.
Okay, I think it's time to move on to Lynne.
Right. And my kitty was beating on the door throughout Merikay's talk until she broke it open. So I'm going to try putting her out again.
Good luck. She can sit there. You can pat the cat.
Well,
we need.
Oh, that's right. You got to give a lecture here.
yeah.
We
like
need
Ernst
Lynne back
Blofeld.
because Lynne is next, and we'll await her getting to her seat as I tell you a little bit about her. Lynne is also an independent scholar specializing in historic costumes and textiles, particularly of New England, with many, many books, articles, and exhibitions under her, what shall we call it, New England belt. Lynne.
Thank you, Julie. And before I share my screen, I just want to show you the book I'm going to be referencing, because for some reason my scanner wasn't working properly. And so, can you read that?
Very well.
American Fancy Exuberance in the Arts, 1790 to 1840 by Sumter Pretty. So
I read that book.
I'm sorry?
I read that book.
Well, very good. It's a very good book.
Think about it.
It's a very good book. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. My Harold Mailand is a professional friend and has been for years. He's a super nice guy, and I'm not the least surprised that he would have really wonderful quilts and quilts with some humor and such in his collection. And he very kindly sent me a copy of his catalog. And I was able to read it quickly, but my goal was to have his exhibition come to the New England Quilt Museum. So I had to pass the catalog along to Pam Weeks as quickly as possible, and I haven't gotten it back yet. So unfortunately, they felt that that the audience here in New England doesn't care enough about old quilts, which I think is absolutely tragic. I know. I am so sad that I won't get to see this exhibition myself. But anyway, I saw the catalog and read the catalog. So my presentation is addressing a question brought up in Harold's catalog about the impact of kaleidoscopes on quilts. So Sumter Pretty, who is the author and curator of the American Fancy exhibition, which was in 2004, states that the invention of the kaleidoscope in 1814 and its dissemination in the late 18 teens and 1820s had, quote, an astonishing impact on American quilts, which were revolutionized by the device. I feel that he has overstated the importance of the kaleidoscope in American quilt design. Pretty wrote, quote, a simple kaleidoscope having 2 mirrors and a few bits of broken glass was often used as a design source for the popular starburst pattern. And he uses Rebecca Scattergood Savory's quilt that we see here as his example. I believe this is often also called sunburst. And here's another example. Something that I found interesting is that the kaleidoscope ends up with 7 wedges, but these quilts are all 8 wedges. And here's another variation on this sort of kaleidoscopic effect. I'm willing to agree that the kaleidoscope may indeed have had some design impact, especially for the large star designs that were popular in the 1820s and 1830s, but it was not the source for the common piece block patterns that Pretty states. I would argue that these sorts of mosaic designs have been known not just for centuries, but probably for millennia. They can be seen in ancient Roman mosaics from before the Christian era. And here are some medieval examples. These are called cosmatesque or cosmatesque mosaics because there was one family in Italy that for generations specialized in creating these mosaic patterns for cathedrals and such. And their name was Cosmati. And so look here, this is very much a star-like kind of kaleidoscopic pattern. And look at all these star patterns. I mean, these are quilt patterns. And this is from, you know, the Middle Ages here. In the 18th and early 19th century, patchwork meant mosaic designs created by basting pieces of fabric over paper templates, then sewing them together edge to edge. The hourglass pattern that's common in surviving 18th century patchwork is seen in those ancient mosaic floors. But what I'm interested in here is this circular pattern in the center of the Anna Tools quilt from 1785, which I think has kind of a kaleidoscopic idea to it. And what's the source for that? I think it comes from the well-known compass rose pattern. Compasses have been used by mariners in the Western world since the 1100s and by the Chinese beginning a century earlier. So here we have, these are embroidered blankets. These were called rose blankets in the 18th and early 19th century. And it's after the compass rose that we see on mariners' compasses. And these are all actually reproductions they're documented. These were all made by a fellow I know named Robert Stone. He weaves and embroiders these reproduction blankets for the reenacting community. And so here we have that circular symmetrical design and these star patterns and such that are among those groups that of design groups that Sumter Pretty claims come out of the kaleidoscope, but they were seen in these embroidered blankets a century earlier. So these blankets, I think, may have been inspiration for the mariners' compass quilt patterns that came up certainly in the early 19th century, and I would argue even by the late 18th century, because there's this passage in the diary and the letters of Eliza Southgate of Boston. She wrote in 1798, quote, "You mention in your letter about my pieces, which you say you imagine are purloined. I am very sorry if they are, for I set more by them than any of my pieces. One was the mariner's compass, and the other was a geometrical piece." So this is 1798, and she's talking about a mariner's compass. And I have pondered whether that could be a geometry exercise or an actual pieced quilt. But I think that these are actually pieced fabric, because she calls one the mariner's compass and she calls the other one a geometrical piece. If it's if they're both geometry exercises, why would she call one a mariner's compass and the other a geometrical piece? That's my thing. And she does talk about doing patchwork also in these letters in the late 18th century. So I think this is a pattern that goes back to at least to the late 18th century. Let's see. In addition to the kaleidoscope, I think it's important to keep in mind that with the establishment of a great many young ladies' academies in the half century following the Revolutionary War, girls' education improved. Many academies offered a curriculum that included math and geometry, skills that might be used to create more complex quilt blocks, such as the mariner's compass, or large 8-pointed stars. So as I stated, Eliza Southgate mentions her purloined school projects, including the mariner's compass, in 1798, 20 years before the kaleidoscope came into fashion. Sumter Pretty also states, quote, "Kaleidoscopes with 3 mirrors placed specifically at 30, 60, and 90 degrees created variations on a hexagon. Quilts," oops, I was supposed to talk about this earlier, but here's another beautiful example of a mariner's compass. And here are those amazing geometry exercises that girls were learning in school as ladies' academies shifted their education from the fancy work into actual scholarly studies. So they're studying natural history and English and writing and geometry and various things like that. Sorry, I messed up my slides there. Okay, so back to this. So Sumter Pretty states, "Kaleidoscopes with 3 mirrors placed specifically at 30, 60, and 90 degrees create variations on a hexagon. Quilts with such hexagonal patches, known as honeycomb patchwork, first appeared in the 1820s and illustrate this perspective. But in fact, hexagons had been around for generations. In fact, the hexagon and other shapes of mosaic patchwork was a fancy work technique that came over from England, where it had been practiced for over 100 years before the invention of the kaleidoscope. Janet Ray wrote in Quilts of the British Isles, quote, "The hexagon and variations on it are known to have been used in England from the 18th century and probably earlier. An elongated version of the shape appears in the Indian chintz quilt circa 1708 at Levens Hall in Westmoreland, along with the shapes of the cross and the octagon." So it's absolutely true that the hexagons take off in the 1820s, but it definitely didn't start there. This is the earliest complete hexagon quilt that I have ever seen. This is in the Wadsworth Athenaeum collection, and when I found it there when I was the acting curator, I was very excited. It has a very firm family history, dating it to 1794 in Bedford, Pennsylvania. And round about the time that I was studying this quilt, I found 2 more early 1790s hexagon quilts from the same area, from around Philadelphia. And it's like they were all shopping in the same dry goods stores. The fabrics are so similar. And John Stiles, I believe, a British textile scholar, came and happened to look at this, and he agreed totally that this is 1790s. So we have 3 hexagonal American quilts dating to the 1790s. So again, we're a good like 20, 25 years earlier than the kaleidoscope. I would argue that much more important than the kaleidoscope to the development of American quilts was the Industrial Revolution. The shift from human power to water power began in England in the mid-18th century and included major improvements in spinning, weaving, dyeing, and printing technologies. Cotton was most easily adapted to these new production methods. And the Industrial Revolution came to New England shores in the early 1790s with the establishment of Samuel Slater's cotton spinning mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. By the end of the 1820s, New England manufacturers were turning out millions of yards of finished cotton and woolen fabrics annually. And of course, this had a profound effect on prices. With the improvements in textile spinning, weaving, and printing technology, the cost of printed cottons fell dramatically in the first half of the 19th century. For the first time, textiles became abundant in New England and, I would say, American households, and virtually everyone could afford to have multiple changes of clothes. And this, of course, led to an abundance of fabric scraps that could be used for piecing quilts. Again, Pretty states, 8-pointed stars occasionally appeared in 18th century needlework, particularly in samplers and bed rugs, yet were rare during the early period. The star appears frequently after the invention of the kaleidoscope. And it's true, stars were among the most popular blocks to piece in the first half of the 19th century. But like hexagons, the design goes way back, even in America, before the invention of the kaleidoscope. And you know, these are ideas that are simmering, that are elite fancy work techniques in the 18th century, but with the dramatic reduction in the cost of textiles, it democratizes the fancy work technique and makes it available to everyone. So I think of the kaleidoscope's effect on quilts kind of like I think of Queen Victoria's effect on wedding dress fashion. People like to credit Victoria as the originator of the virginal white wedding dress, but in fact, it was the publicity surrounding her wedding that merely popularized the idea that had in fact been in practice by the elite for generations. She didn't create it. And she married in 1840. And here's a beautiful white wedding dress from 1839, the year before, showing that this was an idea that was already out there. It just needed to be popularized. So that's my argument about the kaleidoscope. So I think Harold has a fabulous quilt collection, but I have to disagree about his statement in the catalog about the impact of the kaleidoscope.
Well, you make a really strong case, for sure. And you know,
I read that.
popularization might have been it. It was always there, but then the kaleidoscope comes around, and all of a sudden, these 8-lobed figures are more talked about and displayed, and that just reinforces what was already going on.
And it's changes in girls' education to more practical geometry rather than just needlework and, you know, what they'd been taught. I read that book, the book on fancy, and it was really fun because it just talks about the idea of fancy, which is what needlework was. You had plain sewing and fancy sewing, but there were some limbs that were way out there, I think.
Well, this book and catalog, you know, as I showed you, it's fantastic. There's absolutely no denying that it's fantastic. I think he just got carried away.
Well, you have to have a hypothesis, and when things don't work well, you go with it. It's just like me.
Yeah.
Got to be an herbarium. Yeah.
Oh,
Good.
so I guess I just make my case, and there's just no discussing it.
Right. I was going to say, recently I noticed that Linda Baumgarten and Kim Ivey had found a reference to sexagon quilts
Oh, really?
in the 1820s. And, you know, that's a word we wouldn't use, although to them sex was a different thing. But then I went and poked around a little and found maybe 3 or 4 references to sexagon quilts.
Oh.
So that would probably be easier to remember than hexagon. You know, people have such a hard time with octagon, hexagon. But if it was sexagon, we would never forget it.
Well, don't you have haven't you found a dated quilt yourself, Barbara? One of the starburst or sunburst, whatever you want to call it, that dates prior to 1818. I thought I remember you saying.
I don't remember. It'll wake me up tonight, but.
Well, we'll post it if you find it again.
All right, I will.
All right. Well, we'll move on to Moy. As I know a kid who only read and never heard it. So he was accused of something, a friend of mine, accused of something when he was about 8 years old of something at the dinner table. And he said, Moy? So let's see, I too am an independent sort of amateur scholar and historian, and I've seen a lot of quilts, and that's why I'm here. Yeah, I'm going to talk about machine quilting, and what we know is that machine quilting in the last, how many years, 25, 30 years, has become the way of the world. It's sort of taken over, and so much so that here you're looking at 2 fairly modern quilts. These were both in the 2022 QuiltCon exhibition, and they are machine quilted. Even traditional designs like this sort of kind of a variation of Burgoyne surrounded, but very much with references to woven coverlets, is entirely machine quilted. I noticed that at QuiltCon 2022 last year, there were many, many categories, and they had to actually make a category for handwork. And you'll notice that what it says is quilts in this category include at least one element of handwork. So what I wanted to look at was how far back machine quilting goes. And I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out when the sewing machine was invented and who invented it and what happened to it, because that's a whole other thing that, but here from newspapers.com, because I too have taken the leap and subscribed to newspapers.com, having been encouraged by Merikay and Barbara. Here's a New York Daily Herald in 1853 says, I Am Singer is offering a new and original machine, which does a new stitch in a new way. And you can see here that the improved machines for quilting. Now, here is a lithograph of a Singer's patented 1851 machine from New York. So we know that sewing machines have been around for a long time. On the left in 1871, Seymour, Indiana, an ad for the Wilson machine that does quilting. This machine has no superior. And on the right from the New England Farmer in 1895. And here they're telling you exactly kind of how to do it. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this is suggestions about how to machine quilt your quilt as a whole quilt rather than in pieces, which is how some of them turn out to be done. So I mainly in this presentation, I'm just going to show you examples of machine quilted quilts earlier than the current craze or vogue or fad or whatever we want to call it, which has kind of taken over hand quilting to a great extent, and again in the last few decades. I don't know how old this quilt is, but it is certainly before the current era that we're talking about, with the green that has turned to dun. And it's machine quilted in a design that we would call echo or wave design. But one of the things we have to be careful about is wanting to know that it is possible to have an old top that was more recently machine quilted. And that's what I'm pretty sure has happened here with this detail of an early quilt signed in 1849, but with machine quilting that looks very much like the kind that was done in the 1950s and 60s. So what I wanted to look for and found, including in my own collection, are quilts that actually have dates on them, or pretty good references to by way of fabric and style that they were done at the time the quilt was made and early. This is a beautiful quilt, which we who saw Alden O'Brien's exhibition Eye on Elegance a few years ago in Washington, D.C. at the DAR Museum got a chance to see up close. And here's what she said about this beautiful quilt. Women embrace sewing machines for everyday use. Mary Sneed used hers to machine stitch a tiny grid on the white squares and outline the basket weave print. Family tradition stated that Mary Sneed made this with one of the first sewing machines in Texas, suggesting the pride women felt in having the latest technology. And let it be said that most quilts that were made after the invention of the sewing machine were not machine quilted. They sometimes included machine piecing, often included the machine working on the binding, but nowhere else in the quilt. But some people were very, very, very proud of what they had in a sewing machine. And here you see a close-up of that beautiful quilt. She's made and stuffed the basket by hand and stitched the white part of her new sewing machine, white part on her new sewing machine, one of the first made after it was invented. The maker's pride of owning a sewing machine and her pleasure in using the technology are evident in both this story and in the quilt, a story that came from the family. The white blocks feature a grid of tiny half-inch squares made feasible by the speed of the foot-powered treadle. But the potholder construction, in which each square is quilted individually, is a necessary concession, as it would not be possible to put the entire quilt through the sewing machine. But that is not the case, although it is obviously much easier to machine quilt a quilt piece by piece, and then put those pieces together, whether they are finished to begin with or raw. They are quilted square by square and then put together later. Here's an interesting quilt that is at the National Museum of American History, and I'm going to show you some better close-ups here. But it's, according to them, made between 1860 and 1875. So I'm concentrating at this point on 19th century quilts. Let me go back here just for a second. There we go. National Museum of American History, 1860 to 75. And they go on to talk about how the crafting of this quilt was made possible by William Grover's 1851 invention of the double thread chain stitch. And I'm very far from an expert on the sewing machine and how this kind of stuff is done, but that's what they say. But let's look just a little bit here at these wonderful details of that quilt that they date 1860 to 1875. They do not have a maker, and the quilt does not have a date on it, but that's their what they figure. What I was looking for and was able to find were a few quilts that were machine quilted and had the date on the quilt. And again, we don't know for sure that it wasn't quilted later, but it's a pretty good guess that this quilt, which says, Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, Mrs. Half, 1873, is a machine quilted quilt. A little bit difficult to see the machine quilting, but here we have a quilt dated. Best of all, of course, would be okay, here's a centennial quilt that Charlene Stevens gave me permission to use. Let me get a little bit closer to it so you can see some of the machine quilting. It's a centennial quilt, obviously 1776, 1876. But best of all, in terms of authenticity, is this quilt that I own, that it just has a very unusual design. I call it candy dish, I think, and I don't know if I ever found that officially or not, but that's what I've been calling it. I use this picture of Joe because it gets a little bit closer up to the machine quilting. And what's wonderful about this quilt is that it has, she quilted on the machine, she quilted in red. And what she wrote was Mother's Gift to Willie. And this quilt was also made block by block. So you can see on the back of the quilt, it's actually behind me, and I don't know if I'll get to it before the end of this talk, but you can see on the back that what she's done is covered over the seams where she's sewn each individual block together with some green fabric. So on the back, it's a green and white grid where she's covering the seams where she sewed the blocks together. But even better, and let me see if I can help you go through this. This says Jane Lovell or Lavelle, made 1883, born 1854. I guess I should have gone in a different direction. Jane Lavelle, born 1854, made 1883. So here's a quilt that for which there is no mistaking when it was made. It is a 19th century machine quilted quilt in these fancy, fancy designs and in red thread, which is just lovely, lovely to have and lovely to know that although machine quilted quilts in the 19th century are rare, they do exist. Oh, there, I showed a little bit better block. Again, Jean Lavelle, born February 28th, 1854, made 1883. Bringing it into the 20th century, but before this current phase, we need to acknowledge Mr. Ernest B. Haight, who lived in David City, Nebraska, and created a number of just incredibly interesting quilts. He was an engineer by trade, and the story goes that he criticized his wife when she was making a quilt that her points didn't match, and she supposedly said, yeah, well, go ahead and do it yourself. And he did. He made 300 quilts in his life, and he also what he was interested in was efficiency and how to get things to be more perfect and precise. And as an engineer, he was able to do that. The first quilts that he made were hand quilted by his wife and mother. It was kind of a family affair. But this is a quilt that is also behind me. I own it, and that was made by him. He named it Falling Blocks and did machine quilt it, but you can also see that he was interested in how to take common shapes and do something new with them very precisely. This happens to be a quilt. Let me see, I think I have this, yes. So he embroidered around the outside on his quilts, what they were, who made them. In one case, he has a quilt that's at the National Quilt Museum, where he credits his own father by name, Elmer, with hand quilting the quilt. And he recognizes and acknowledges that in embroidery around the outside of his quilts. He did do this, let me go back here. He did do this practical machine quilting for the homemaker in 1974. And I think it's kind of, would be very interesting to follow up and find out just how widespread that publication went, and how influential he actually was on spreading the idea of machine quilting, which is now just so ubiquitously used. And bringing it to the present, I did want to show this quilt that Joe Cunningham made in 2014. Joe has figured out a way to do his own quilting designs in that complement in one way or another whatever the content of his piece is. On the left, you see the full quilt. This was in 2014 when the protesters in Kyiv were behind barricades and sleeping and trying to ward off an invasion by Russia. And Joe figured out a way to do machine quilting of his own designs. And what you see on the right are details of the sleeping protesters. I wanted to end on a slightly later note. So from the Sabetha, Kansas Republican Herald in 1906, the writer wrote, "Here is a suggestion to the women who are piecing quilts for machine quilting. Make one in pale yellow and white sateen." Mrs. Lon Meeker had such a one on display, which took the first prize, and it was a beauty. Of course, hers was hand quilted. The other thing that I loved about this particular entry, again, that I found on newspapers.com, is right above it, this writer, they must have had a ball, these writers. Here's what the writer wrote about a fair or a state county fair or something. In the picture department, the one thing that was really good was a crayon bust of Beethoven. It was fine. Miss Jessie Guild and Miss Nanny Burke have the rest of the work bested. So then I just, you want to make a machine quilted quilt, make it pale yellow and white sateen. Anyway, there we go. There we are. What do you think?
I unmuted me and you can hear the thunder behind me.
Oh,
And you
wow.
can hear my
Right.
cat pounding on the door again.
As far as
Life just goes on. Well, that's pretty fascinating. The idea that many of them were done block by block. What Pam calls potholder quilts.
Yeah.
I don't know
What I tried to find was a quilt that we used in the Oakland Museum. I did an exhibition, co-curated an exhibition at the Oakland Museum in 1981, and among their collection was an all-white quilt that was one piece and had been machine quilted very elaborately, the whole thing. And in the center was a block that, in block letters, had the names of two women and 1851 and the name of the machine that they machine quilted it on. But in order to get a hold of that one, I have to go to the museum, because it's not, which I'm going to do, because I've never seen that quilt again, and it was such a wonderful example. That was a Wilcox White, or I don't remember exactly the name of the company, but I think it's important for people to know that, one more time, nothing's new under the sun, right?
Nothing. I always been working on quilts associated with Abraham Lincoln and his wife. And in the 1864 Chicago Sanitary Commission Fair, the Wheeler and Wilcox, Wheeler and Wilson, they often had demonstration machines up there. So you would buy one. And they talked about making a quilt, a machine quilted quilt on the Wheeler and Wilson for Abraham Lincoln.
Ooh.
But no trace of that's been found. And my question is, was it a bed quilt, or was it the lining of the coat, which was that he was shot in? It was beautifully quilted with
That's
an
hand
eagle
quilted.
autos on a machine. And so I wonder if that wasn't the quilt that was given to him or sent to him. He never came to Chicago that year.
Lynn, are you saying that the lining of his coat was hand quilted?
No, machine quilted.
No, Lynn is saying it was hand
Oh,
quilted.
it is hand quilted?
I believe so.
Well, we will
We'll have to
put it
check
up.
and we'll have to-
I thought it was machine quilted, and there was a lot of talk about who did it. The woman, maybe 30 years later, everything Lincoln associated with the assassination. The
Well,
woman was who made it, was interviewed, but I cannot find any reference actually to her as a human being. So that's sort of where it
I'll
is.
double check and I'll
Check,
I'll
and we
post
can
it.
fix it. We'll put it on our Facebook page.
It
This
does
is
seem-
also our opportunity to give a plug to AQSG, which publishes an annual journal called Uncoverings. And there are a couple of essays in past volumes I can think of that address Ernest Haight and machine quilting and the use of the sewing machine in early quilts.
And the International Quilt Museum did a wonderful exhibition on him called The Engineer That Could, that was curated by Jonathan Gregory. And in fact, in looking at material for Ernest B. Haight, I looked today at 5 segments. They did a whole, they did the exhibition, and then they did kind of a presentation that is 5 4-minute segments on Ernest B. Haight. Really fascinating, and the quilts are just amazing. The guy made 300 quilts in his life, and was a fascinating character, actually. So we'll put that in the bibliography as well.
And Linda Carlson's article on 4-block quilts. I think.
You mean in the
that-
bibliography?
No, I don't think we mentioned that. I think when she wrote that, I'm pretty sure, am I wrong? She wrote the article, was she, Debbie, or was it her
I
book?
think there's a book.
It was a
I think
book.
So there's 3 books.
But when she wrote that, I remember thinking, nobody's thought about that before. I mean, and here we are 30, maybe 40 years later talking about it. And she donated her quilts to the museum. It was, it's a rich, we're in a mature stage of our quilt scholarship. Then I just think that's terrible that the New England Quilt Museum said.
Well, they know their audience. We can say wham, 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 but honestly, I have certainly witnessed that myself, and I do not second guess their decision.
San Jose Quilt Museum says exactly the same thing.
Really?
But I'd be interested, I was thinking about it as we were talking about it earlier. What happened to the Boston show? What was attendance like at the Boston show?
Oh, it was excellent. It was huge, and it's in LA now, right?
Right. And
But
so-
I wonder, well,
And
I'd like to know, I mean, somebody ought to go see the LA show, because I don't think they have all the pieces.
I'm going.
And let us know, because I think they hit a nerve. I think they really did, the Boston
Yeah.
Museum of Fine
Well,
Arts. They added so many really African-American art. It was the time, Black Lives Matter, and they really hit. Even having the 2 Harriet Powers quilts there were along that theme. So,
But the thing is, even though they had the Harriet Powers quilts and many other antiques, it was totally publicized
right,
with contemporary quilts.
with contemporary quilts, that's right.
Yeah, Bisa Butler and
Lisa Butler. Right.
And the big ball, the big ball. I can't remember who did the big ball.
I did want to mention, I spoke with Pat Ferrero the other day, and she and Sabrina Geschwander, I forgot, I don't know exactly how to say her name. Sabrina makes quilts out of film strips.
Oh, yes.
Very interesting stuff. And they are friends because Sabrina's first quilt was made from film strips of Hearts and Hands, which is Pat's film. And somehow they didn't know each other, but somebody put them together. So there's going to be a showing of Hearts and Hands. Pat's going to be there, and Sabrina's also going to be there. Pat is interviewing Sabrina on January 18th at the Skirball. If anybody watching is in the LA area or can get there, that's going to be an interesting evening, January 18th, or afternoon, January 18th.
Well,
I don't know if you all can hear the car horn honking outside my door. Good. But anybody have anything else? Because otherwise we'll bid our
Time to go.
audience farewell and hope to see you. We are with you every Wednesday, second Wednesday of every month. And you can contact us through our Facebook page. And we enjoyed having you, and thank you all. Good to see
Happy
you.
New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Okay, y'all.
Did you know you can watch our previous episodes on Vimeo? Vimeo.com/quiltdistrict/VOD_pages. Or you can search for the 6 know-it-alls when you go to the main page of Vimeo.com. You can also catch our first 3 episodes, which are free, on our YouTube channel. You can go directly to our YouTube channel, or you can go to youtube.com and search for the 6 know-it-alls. You can also find all the updates and links to previous episodes on quiltdistrict.com. Go to quiltdistrict.com and then the 6 know-it-alls tab, and there you'll find all the upcoming episode information, as well as the background on how the 6 know-it-alls got started and some biography information on all of the know-it-alls. You'll also want to be sure you put your email address in here so that you can get notified of upcoming events straight to your email inbox.
And I'm harping on this because lighting is so important to understanding the seasonal rhythms of quilting in this early period and why it began to change in the 19th century.
But that's not the way we use it, just to stick it in there. And so often you will find some turkey red pieces just put in there for a little flair. Even this one has a little bit of red down there, although that's a wool.
This is one quilt that I wanted to talk about today because we just were able to add it to the collection last year. Yeah, it was on loan for many years from the family. And some of you know the quilt maker Anna Catherine, known as Catherine Hummel Markey Garnhart of Frederick, Maryland. And thanks to my predecessor, Nancy Gibson, we now know of 10 quilts made by Markey Garnhart. And we now own 3.
Yes.
Yes.
And that is very interesting that it's made for the wife of a minister. And I have never heard of the ladies sewing group being called a circle of industry. So that's quite interesting. I wonder if it's belongs to that denomination, if there are others that call themselves something similar.
So I just wanted to show how the designs of these bed rugs relate to whole cloth quilt and other types of quilts. So here we have one of the foot bed rugs, and here we have a whole cloth quilt that was made by Olive Curtis Baker in Connecticut. And the stitching of this whole cloth quilt is basically pretty much the same idea as you see in the bed rug.
The thing is, and this goes back to Lynne too with the bed rugs. If we were looking at men's work, if we were looking at ceramics like graffiti plates or painted chests, we wouldn't be thinking of it as a hobby.